Hello everyone. In this video, we will study the cerebrum and the cerebral cortex. Cerebrum is the largest part of the brain. So first we will study the superolateral surface of the cerebrum. Now, as we saw in the last one, that the cerebral surface is very convoluted and it is very wavy to accommodate very large area into a smaller cavity. The areas which are invaginating inside are known as the sulci, and the area which is evaginating or which is bulging in between is known as the gyrus or gyri, multiple gyri. Now there are multiple sulci and multiple gyri, and there is a lot of variation in every individual. But there are certain main sulci and main gyri which are important, which we will study today. Now the most prominent feature that we see on the superolateral surface is the Sylvian fissure, also known as the lateral sulcus or the lateral fissure. Now this divides the superolateral surface into different lobes. The part above the Sylvian fissure is known as the frontal lobe, and the part below the Sylvian fissure is known as the temporal lobe. Another sulcus that comes on the superolateral surface lies around 5 cm above the occipital pole, and this is known as the parieto-occipital sulcus. It is a chief sulcus of the medial surface, but a part of it also comes on the superolateral surface. Another notch is present just before on the inferolateral border, just before the occipital pole, and this is known as the pre-occipital notch. So, an imaginary line joining the parieto-occipital sulcus and the pre-occipital notch divides the occipital lobe from the rest of the brain surface. Another imaginary line is drawn from the Sylvian fissure, which is joining the first line, and the part above this line is the parietal lobe, and the part below this line is the temporal lobe. So these are the arbitrary divisions of the superolateral surface into different lobes. Now we will study the main sulci and gyri into different lobes. So let's first see the frontal lobe. The frontal lobe is divided from the parietal lobe by a chief sulcus, which is always the central sulcus. Now the location of the central sulcus is fairly constant, and it can be located by joining the line from the frontal pole to the occipital pole and finding the midpoint of this line. The central sulcus lies around 2 cm posterior to the midpoint of the line joining the frontal and the occipital pole. So here is where we will draw the central sulcus. This sulcus is just short of the Sylvian fissure and does not actually reach up to the Sylvian fissure. It just stops before the Sylvian fissure, but it reaches up to the superior medial surface, and the part of the central sulcus also lies on the medial surface. So the part of the brain in front of the central sulcus and above the Sylvian fissure is known as the frontal lobe, and the part of the brain above the Sylvian fissure and posterior to the central sulcus is known as the parietal lobe. Right. So as we can see in this diagram, that the frontal lobe is the largest lobe of the brain. So let's look at the main sulci and gyri of the frontal lobe. So in front of the central sulcus, we have another sulcus, which is aptly named as the precentral sulcus. The gyrus between the precentral sulcus and the central sulcus is known as the precentral gyrus. Precentral gyrus is the chief gyrus, which is also known as the primary motor cortex. This primary motor cortex has got a representation of the opposite half of the entire body. So it has got areas which the stimulation of the primary motor cortex produces specific movements on the opposite side of the limb, and it has got a representation in an inverted form. This is known as motor homunculus. So that in the part which is closer to the Sylvian fissure, it represents the tongue. Then above that we have the face, above that we have the hand, then we have the upper limb, then we have the trunk, and as we go closer to the midline, we are represented with the lower limbs. So it's like someone is standing upside down. This is how the part is represented. Now also note that all these parts are not equally divided in the motor homunculus. The part that is represented, which has got more finer scales, is represented more. Hence, tongue and face are responsible for the production of speech and also the facial expression. So they've got much larger area than compared to the lower limb like or the feet. Again, a hand and the fingertips have got much more area covered on the motor homunculus. And the upper third part, or the part that is closer to the medial surface, is represented by the lower limbs. And the feet and the perineum goes much on the medial side, that we'll see when we are discussing the medial surface. So this is the primary motor area. Mind this does not directly connect to specific muscles. It produces specific movements. Like the stimulation of this area will produce flexion of the elbow, but it does not supply the specific muscles. That part is done at the spinal cord level. So this is the primary motor cortex. In front of the primary motor cortex, we have the frontal lobe is divided into three parts by three sulci. The top sulcus is known as a superior frontal sulcus. We have a middle frontal sulcus, and we also have a inferior frontal sulcus, which joins the precentral sulcus. So the part above the superior frontal sulcus is known as the superior frontal gyrus. In between the between the superior frontal sulcus and the inferior frontal sulcus, we have the middle frontal gyrus, which is again divided into a superior part and the inferior part. And the part below the inferior frontal sulcus is known as the inferior frontal gyrus. Now, the area in front of the precentral sulcus is, we saw that the area between the precentral sulcus and the central sulcus is a primary motor area. So in front of the precentral sulcus, we have a premotor area. Now, this area is much wider in the upper or the medial part, and it is narrower in the lower part. So this is the premotor area. Premotor area is also associated with the motor activities or the movements, but it is involved in the planning of the movement. So for example, if I want to raise my upper limb or raise my right hand above my head, so the primary motor area knows what all muscles to activate, but it is a premotor area which decides whether what all muscles will be activated and what movement will actually be carried out. So if I am trying to raise my hand above my head, so I'll have an abduction of the shoulder. I'll also have a part of flexion of my elbow, also have flexion of my hand. So what all muscles need to be activated, that is decided by that is programmed by the premotor area. Because premotor area also has connections with the sensory cortex, it has connections with the deeper nuclei, the thalamus, the cerebellum. So via sensory cortex, via all these other deeper connections, it actually plans that first it has to know that where my hand is. If my hand is lying on the opposite side, then it needs to make an outward movement of my hand and then raise it about. But if it is lying down on the lower side, then it just has to produce an abduction. So via its communications with the sensory cortex and the other areas, it knows what is the position and what movement is actually to be intended. Together, the premotor area and the motor area is also sometimes known as primary motor cortex. In front of the upper part of the primary premotor area, we also have a supplementary motor area. This supplementary motor area lies on the superior frontal gyrus, but a larger part of it lies on the medial frontal gyrus that we'll see on the medial surface of the cerebrum. The supplementary motor area it is associated with more activities which has got a bilateral representation, and so for organs like face or the truncal musculature, in which both the sides of the muscles have to act simultaneously. So that is again controlled by the supplementary motor area. Below the supplementary motor area, in the posterior part of the middle frontal gyrus, we have a frontal eye field area. The frontal eye field area, it controls the voluntary movement of both the eyes, which is known as conjugate gaze, on the opposite side. So if my left side frontal eye field area is activated, my eyes will look on the right side. Both the eyes will simultaneously look on the right side. Now please note that this is not dependent on the visual stimulus. So I'm not having anything, I'm not seeing anything on the right side. I just want to shift my eyes on the right side. Then that is controlled by the frontal eye field area on the left side. But if I'm following a visual stimulus, like if I'm following a pencil on the right side, now that is controlled by the occipital cortex or the visual cortex, and that is not required in frontal eye field area. So for lesion in the frontal eye field area, one will not be able to move the eye on the opposite side, and there will be a fixed gaze on the same side of the frontal eye field area lesion. But the patient will still be able to follow any object or any gaze on the opposite side if it is on only a frontal eye field lesion when the visual cortex is intact. So that is the frontal eye field area. Now the inferior frontal gyrus is divided into three parts by two rami arising from the sylvian fissure. One is the posterior ramus is known as the ascending ramus, and the anterior ramus is known as the anterior horizontal ramus. These two rami divide the inferior frontal gyrus into three parts. The lower part is known as pars orbitalis. The part between the two rami is known as pars triangularis, and the part between the precentral sulcus and the ascending ramus is known as pars opercularis. Now this posterior part of the inferior frontal gyrus is very important in terms because it represents the motor speech area. So this area is motor speech area. Also note that this area is much closer to the representation of the face and tongue, because this is the motor speech area. It actually decides what you are going to speak and what is your going to be verbal output. So this area controls the movements of your articular muscles, that is the muscles of your larynx. It also controls the movements of the tongue, and finally it produces certain words. So if you have a damage in this area, then the person will not be able to speak. The patient will understand everything, whatever is being told or whatever he is saying or she is saying, but they will not be able to speak what they intend to. They want to speak, but they will not be able to articulate into words. This kind of difficulty is known as aphasia, and particularly if the difficulty lies in the motor area, then it is known as Broca's aphasia or motor aphasia. This area is known as Broca's area. Now the rest of the frontal lobe in front of these areas is known as a prefrontal lobe. Now there are no specific areas in the prefrontal lobe which we know that stimulation will produce a specific deficit or not, but the entire prefrontal lobe is responsible for your personality, for much higher functions. That includes your thought, your insights, your orientation, your attitude, your attention, and all these features lies in the prefrontal lobe. And that also is divided into two parts. If you have the left side is the dominant in 90% of the people. So prefrontal lobe on the dominant is more associated with the verbal aspects, with the execution, with the planning, with the thinking, with the attention and all memory and all those things. But on the non-dominant side, that is on the right side in most of the people, the prefrontal lobe is associated with non-verbal aspects, that is your abstract thinking, your ideas, the recognition of faces, and all those non-verbal aspects of one's personality are on the non-dominant side, that is on the right side of the prefrontal lobe. So that encompasses the frontal lobe. Posterior to the central sulcus lies the parietal lobe. So as we have a precentral sulcus, we also have a postcentral sulcus. So posteriorly we have a postcentral sulcus. Area between the central sulcus and the postcentral sulcus is known as postcentral gyrus. Now postcentral gyrus is relatively smaller in size, or it is relatively thinner than the precentral gyrus, and this gyrus is the primary sensory area or the primary sensory cortex. This receives the exteroceptive and proprioceptive sensations of the opposite side of the body. So exteroceptive sensations are the sensations in which the stimulus arises from outside the body. For example, touch or pain or any vibration, those are the exteroceptive sensations. That your temperature is an exteroceptive sensation. And proprioceptive sensations are the sensations that come from within the body, like for example joint position or the muscle position. So the sensory, if my hand is on the table, the sensory cortex constantly knows that my hand is on the table. So next time when I'm trying to move my hand, the premotor area has to know where the hand was, and based on that information, the premotor area will decide what movement is need to be intended, whether it has to be brought from back to the front or it has to be brought from side to the front. So that information is very essential in the proprioception. So if the patient has a difficulty in proprioceptive problem, or difficulty in, it has got a lesion on the sensory cortex, the patient again will not be able to perform the activity that the patient was used to, because the part of the motor intact, so there is no paralysis, the movements are normal, but then the patient doesn't know that where the hand was to actually produce that intended movement. So if you examine these patients, there will be no deficits, there will be, the power will be normal, but they will still not be able to perform those activities. So that is a primary sensory cortex. Again, like motor homunculus, we also have a sensory homunculus in which the opposite side of the body is represented in an inverted form. So in this homunculus, again in the lower part of the part that is closer to the sylvian fissure is represented by a face, then lips, then we have the fingertips which are very sensitive. So these, the lips and the fingertips occupy the most of the area of the primary sensory cortex. Then we have other areas like trunk, upper limb, and the leg and the lower limb. Again, the perineum, the motor part of the perineum, that is the bowel bladder control, and the sensory part of the perineum, that is the sensations from these bowel and bladder. They are on the medial surface, and they are on the medial surface around the central surface, that we'll see when we'll be discussing the medial surface. Now, in the, if we open this sylvian fissure, we can see that there is an upper lip and there is a lower lip of the sylvian fissure. So the upper lip of the sylvian fissure near the primary sensory cortex also has got a supplementary or a secondary sensory area, which is mainly responsible for the perception of pain. So that is a small area here. Also posterior to the part which is represented by the face. So here posterior to the part of primary sensory cortex which represents the face, we also have the area responsible for the vestibular sensations. So that is a position of your head and if you have giddiness and all those things. So that is a specific area for that. Rest of the parietal lobe is divided into a superior parietal lobule and inferior parietal lobule by a intraparietal sulcus. And there are all some small sulci in between. So this is the superior parietal lobule and this is the inferior parietal lobule. Superior parietal lobule has got a sensory association area. Superior parietal sensory association. The sensory association areas are the areas which do not primarily perceive, but they're responsible for integration of the stimulus or of the input that we get. So if I'm feeling something, then the sensation of the touch or sensation of pain or sensation of is there, but the brain doesn't know that what am I feeling. So it is an association area which correlates these feeling, correlates these perceptions with the previous memories and with other areas, and in this way I will be able to identify that what am I actually feeling. Am I holding the, what, depending on what is the texture of the object that the fingertips are touching, depending on the shape of the object and depending on the surface of the object, and with the past experiences and past memories you will be able to recognize and you will be able to know, interpret that what is being actually being perceived. Around 75% of the cerebral cortex is mainly contains the association areas, and these are the actual areas which make you understand what you are feeling and what you are actually perceiving. Right. So this is a sensory association area which is responsible for the perception of the texture or the shape of the object or the surface, and this together is known as stereognosis. The rest of the inferior parietal lobule is divided, as we'll see. The temporal lobe has again three sulci on the superolateral surface. The top sulcus is known as the superior temporal sulcus, and the area between the superior temporal sulcus and the sylvian fissure is known as superior temporal gyrus. Then we have a middle temporal sulcus, area between the superior and middle temporal sulci are known as the middle temporal gyrus. And we have an inferior temporal sulcus. Inferior temporal sulcus is mainly a feature of the basal surface, but sometimes it also part of it is also seen on the superolateral surface. And again we have an inferior temporal gyrus. Now around this sulci they turn upwards and they reach up to the parietal lobule. We have a sulcus in a curved fashion around the posterior end of the sylvian fissure and around the superior temporal sulcus. So the sulcus around the sylvian fissure, this gyrus around the sylvian fissure is known as supramarginal gyrus, and the gyrus around the superior temporal sulcus is known as angular gyrus. Now these are again one of the very important gyri, as they are associated with speech. So this is the sensory speech area, the part of the inferior parietal lobule, the part of the superior marginal gyrus, and the part of the angular gyrus. This is the sensory speech area. So this is associated with interpretation of what is being heard and what is being seen. So you are seeing something, you are listening to something, you are perceiving those words, you are seeing that stimulus, but to understand that into a speech part and to comprehend to those things is all done by the sensory speech area, also known as the Wernicke's area. So persons who have lesions or who have problems with the sensory speech area, they will not be able to comprehend or they will not be able to understand what they are seeing or what they are listening. So this is a very important area, and damage to this area produces sensory kind of aphasia, or also known as Wernicke's aphasia. A part of sensory speech area also extend into the superior temporal gyrus. Hence, this the Broca's area and the Wernicke's area lie on the dominant side. So in 90% of the people, it is on the left side. But they always lie on the same side. They cannot be on the opposite side. And there is a direct connection between the Broca's area and Wernicke's area by a band of white fiber or a loop of white fiber known as the arcuate fasciculus. That we'll see when we'll be studying the subcortical white matter. So this is the sensory speech area. In front of the sensory speech area, in the upper lip of the superior temporal gyrus, when we open the sylvian fissure, we can see the upper lip of the superior surface of the superior temporal gyrus, and there are multiple transverse gyri, which are divided into anterior transverse gyri and posterior transverse gyri. The anterior part of this transverse gyri are responsible for primary auditory area. So here is a primary auditory area, which again perceives what is being heard. Note that the auditory sensations are represented bilaterally. So if someone has a damage on one side of the auditory area, they'll still be able to understand what they are hearing. Of course, they will have more difficulty on the opposite side of that of the lesion, but they'll still be able to perceive that. So this is the sense primary auditory area. In front of the primary auditory area, near the temporal pole, we have the primary olfactory area, which perceives. The primary olfactory area in humans is very less developed compared to some other animals, but still this area is known as primary olfactory area. And this again primary olfactory is part of rhinium cephalon, which is not that well developed in humans. So that is the temporal lobe, which has more important parts on the superior temporal gyrus. We don't have that any eloquent areas on the middle and inferior temporal gyri. Coming to the occipital cortex or the occipital lobe, there is a calcarine fissure, which is the most important sulcus on the medial surface, but a part of it also comes on the superolateral surface. So this is the calcarine fissure. Now the area of the gyri around the calcarine fissure is known as the gyrus around the calcarine fissure is primarily responsible for the visual activity on what you see, and this is known as visual cortex, or it is also has got white band like appearance, hence it is also known as striate area. So this is the primary visual area around the calcarine fissure. Most part of it is on the medial surface, but a part of it also lies on the superlateral surface, and that more details of the visual cortex and the vision, how the vision is perceived, that we'll see in a separate video in which we'll be discussing the optic pathways. So this is the primary visual area. Around the primary visual area, we have the secondary visual area, as with the sensory perceptions and other perceptions. The association area or visual association secondary areas are the most important, because not only it helps you understand, interpret, and also connection of the second association areas with the other parts decides your how we are going to react to things. So you have primary visual area and visual association area, which lets you interpret what is being seen. So that is the occipital lobe. So as you saw, these are the most eloquent areas on the superolateral surface. Understanding of these areas is very important when you are dealing with vascular disorders or when you are dealing with any surgical disorders or any tumors, to see what all areas are likely to be infected, and before the age of the imaging like CT scan and MRI, based on the presentation of the patients, we were able to earlier localize that where the lesion would be likely. For a neurosurgeon, it is important to know these areas, because on the dominant side, we cannot, if you are going to approach to any subcortical structure, then we have to prefer to not, and we should not enter from any of these eloquent areas, so as not to produce a very gross or very major deficit. In the next video, we'll be discussing the medial surface and the basal surface and the eloquent areas or the important areas on this of this surfaces. So that's all for this video.